Well, welcome everybody. Really good to see so many people turning out, and especially after these couple of years of COVID and not being able to get together, and especially knowing this might be one of our last, if not the last times here at the Embassy Suites. After all these years, a couple decades actually coming here, I know people are a little sad to see this place disappear into a rearview mirror, but I'm glad that tonight we can make our week here a celebratory. I'm John Field. I'm the executive secretary here at the commission. In case you haven't met me, there might be some folks online as well who are joining tonight who don't know who we are or who I am, but they certainly know who our guest of honor is. I just wanted to say that, about this time every year, we take a moment in our annual meeting. We take a moment out of our busy schedules and our technical work and our frustrations here in that technical work in the PSC arena to take a deep breath. We use that moment to remember that in the end, we're all sort of on the same page. We're all aiming for the same goal of sustainable salmon fisheries and the communities that depend on them. And that there are some among us who make that work a little bit easier, a little more enjoyable, regardless of which country, which tribe, which state they come from. When the commission established this award in 2016, remember it had a few goals in mind. It was to honor a person or an organization that has advanced Pacific salmon conservation and management through their unique accomplishments, and to honor Larry Rutter's legacy as a unifying force between Canada and the United States here in the PSC. Larry, of course, believed in that unity, and his long career demonstrated it. More than 3 decades of that career with the Treaty Indian tribes, with the U.S. National Marine Fisheries Service, and the PSC team here that you're all part of. All of that meant that Larry had an immense impact on the work that we do collectively to conserve and manage Pacific salmon. I knew Larry. I think many of you in this room knew him, and while it's sad to not have him here tonight, it certainly is great that we get to take this time every year to remember who he was and what he did for us. One of those people is Deborah Shawver, Larry's widow, who once again is able to join us. Where is Deborah? I know she's here. There she is. Hi, Deborah. Like her marriage to Larry, Deborah's been with us through this process, through thick and thin. COVID didn't stop Deborah. She joined our online ceremonies, and I'm very glad that we finally get to see her in person again. We may also be joined by Darren Yelton from Squamish First Nation. Darren is the carver who made the award tonight. I encourage you to come look at it if you haven't seen it. Darren joined us a couple of years ago to online when we had to do the ceremony during COVID online. So we'll keep track of that. And Darren may want to say a few words as well. As usual, choosing a recipient this year was difficult after receiving a number of well-qualified and well-deserving nominations across our borders and throughout the region. Each year, the selection committee is humbled by the work, the knowledge, and the dedication that so many people have poured into the PSC as an organization that includes you. It proves really hard for us to pick just one person to honor every February, but I'm glad that this year, like in past years, we were able to do it nonetheless. I want to thank my colleague, Susan Bishop, who's here with us tonight, and Neil Davis from Canada, who served with me on the selection committee and helped choose the 2023 recipient of the Larry Rutter Memorial Award in Salmon Conservation, Dr. Gary Morishima. Gary, there are a number of people waiting in line to say a few things tonight, and I will quickly get out of their way. But before I do that, I wanted to say a few things for those of you who don't know Gary very well, or might want a refresher on his 4 decades worth of work here in Pacific salmon. Gary has worked tirelessly for those 4 decades to help ensure a sustainable and resilient salmon resource for the people of the 2 countries. His distinguished career has been dedicated to improving West Coast salmon management, ensuring sustainable fish and fisheries for future generations. He was active in the initial treaty negotiations in 1985 and prior to that, and has remained devoted to the treaty's successful implementation ever since. Throughout his career, Dr. Morishima has made many contributions to resolving U.S. and Canadian issues in salmon management, particularly through technical innovation. For example, he was part of the original bilateral working group that drafted the coastwide management regimes for Chinook and Southern Coho, and he contributed initial work to develop the coded wire tag program that we all know by now, and associated computer models that help digest all those data to support management decisions. Gary's dedication to the treaty and the PSC, of course, continues to this day. He isn't here just for the award, of course. He's here because he's still a very active member in our process. He's provided long service as U.S. Chair of the Coho Technical Committee. He's served for years on the Selected Fisheries Evaluation Committee, or SFEC, really since its inception, the CTC, and the Technical Committee on Data Sharing. Gary's technical leadership has earned him the confidence of both parties. I know that to be true. He's served as a reliable expert during repeated renegotiations of the treaty since 1985. And just as important, he's worked to transfer his knowledge to the next generation of Tech Committee members. He's worked diligently to explain and document the technical underpinnings of the coastwide management regime for Chinook and Coho. He's produced reports such as When a Fish is Not a Fish and Marked Selective Fisheries Lessons Learned. We know these works provide the context and the scientific foundation for productive and effective technical committee members well into the future. In recent years, Gary's been a leader too in bringing attention to the negative impacts of climate change, of course, on Pacific Northwest salmon populations. Gary's guidance and vision largely drove the highly successful 2021 PSC Environmental Indicators Workshop that I think many of you participated in. It was attended by over 100 delegates online, and he remains committed to follow through on that workshop by staying involved in the seminar series steering committee. Given all of that impressive work and his decades of friendship and collaboration with Larry himself, the selection committee knew that this award would be a real fitting recognition of Dr. Morishima's 4 decades of dedication to us as an organization and to our mission to protect Pacific salmon. So Gary, congratulations once again. We're all behind you. I have a particular choreography in mind here, and I think I've talked about it with everyone that's involved in that choreography. If I haven't, then let me know. But the first person up on deck to take my place here at the podium is Phil Anderson, who's right over there. So Phil, please come on up and I'll make room for you.
Thanks very much, John. I had some notes written and I can't find them. I can't ever remember being having the words choreography used just prior to my coming up to speak. But so I'm going to just try to remember a few things. I got a feeling Larry Rutter's looking down on us right now with a warm smile, because Dr. Morishima was very big in his life, as he has been in many of ours. And I'm sure he just is as happy as can be to see that Dr. Morishima is receiving the award named after Larry. So that was kind of my first thought about tonight. Gary, I don't know how long we go back a ways. We're both old, but you're older than me. You're one of the only people in the room that is, but I appreciate you being here. You know, when I thought about whether or not to say anything tonight, and if I did, what to say. Gary is certainly well known for all the work that he's done for the Quinault Indian Nation and for the tribes as a whole. But his work has not just benefited the tribes or this commission. His work has benefited the non-Indian community just as much. Because virtually all of his work has been done on behalf of the resource, on behalf of making sure that we're managing this resource in a way that it's sustainable. I can't think of a more respected scientist that I can remember than Dr. Morishima. We've butted heads a few times, usually one. But one of the things about Gary is he stands his ground. When he believes in something, he stands his ground. And but he's always willing to sit down and talk and work through issues. And I really valued the times that we were able to do that. I've sat across the table from Gary on numerous occasions, mostly when we were accompanied by a Quinault Indian Nation policy person. But I've also sat across the table from him in Tahola when I was director of WDFW, when he was there on behalf of the policy folks of the Quinault Indian Nation. I mean, that's how much respect that he has for the people he worked for. So when I think across, we're here talking about his contribution to the Pacific Salmon Commission, but his contributions, as great as they are here, go far beyond the commission. I've been involved with the Pacific Fishery Management Council for 40 years, and Gary has been there all of those 40 years and some ahead of that. And his contribution there has just been outstanding. And in the North of Falcon process, which is our preseason state tribal co-management process, Gary has contributed to that year after year after year, and held the manager's feet to the fire, made sure that we did things that were good for the resource. So I have nothing but the highest regard and respect for Gary, for his contribution to the Pacific Salmon Commission, but more than that, to the anadromous fisheries resources, salmon, steelhead, across the Northwest and the entire West Coast. And his contribution just cannot be overstated. And so I'm glad I got a chance to come up and talk a little bit about Gary and participate tonight in his honor. So Gary, congratulations. You're well deserving of this award, and Larry's looking down with a smile.
Thanks, Phil. Next, I think it's Arlene Tompkins. Thanks, Arlene.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, John. Hello, Gary. I have a few short messages. The first one, I think I'll read a message that was sent by Brian Riddle today. So he couldn't be here. But, so Brian writes, it's fair to say that as we started to build analytical methods back in the dark years, brackets, we were a very small group. Tom Cooney, Howard Shaler, Paul Starr, Brian Riddle, but Gary was the leader. And yes, Jim Scott and Wonder Bread followed soon after. That means. Gary always openly shared his insights and was usually right. We all owe Gary a huge thanks, and I am certain that Larry Rutter would be smiling knowing this. So well-deserved, Gary, and many thanks. From my perspective, I met Gary the first time in the early 90s. My introduction to the PSC, I was just out of university, totally naive. I started working with DFO, with Brian Riddle, and I was thrown into the Chinook Technical Committee. So, sink or swim. And Gary was one of the first persons that I met there. And I quickly realized that Gary was the guy. He had all the answers. He knew the history, knew the methodology, and he was always willing to help, to answer those questions. I've been fortunate over the last, I guess, 3 decades or so to work with Gary on multiple committees, starting with the Chinook, then the Selective Fishery Evaluation Committee. We co-chaired the Coho Technical Committee. I've lost track of how many years. And then on the Coastwide Tag Improvement Committee. And Gary was a constant force on all of those. We were all fortunate to have his technical leadership, his mentorship for all the new people coming in, and his sage advice and wisdom. And I often remember those few little words at the end of the day where, have you thought of this? So, but I can also say that Gary was highly respected by all the members of those committees on both sides, on both parties. And Gary always had the best interests of salmon resource, wild salmon resource. And I think he's most deserving of the Larry Rutter Award. I think there's no doubt. So I just wanted, on behalf of the Coho members and the other committee members, which I think I can speak for, to say a big thank you to you for your technical leadership, for sharing your wisdom and knowledge, as well as your patience and your kindness, and your dedication to the salmon resource and to your contributions to the Salmon Commission. I really appreciate all of it. Thank you, Gary.
Next, I'd like to invite friends from the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission up to the front of the room. Ed, I don't know if you have other colleagues with you, but please come on up.
Commission members, tribes, Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, tribes, from our 20-member tribes.
Yeah, is she here?
I don't know.
Is Katie here? Oh, there she is.
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity. You know, I could write a book. I've often been asked to do that. Big part of that book would be Gary Morishima. The book would be about life as an Indian, treaty Indian on the Quinault Reservation, or perhaps in Hoh River, where my ancestors come from, or Jamestown, Sklallam, where my ancestors come from. In walking with my family, my sister Yvonne Hudson from Hoh River, and my brother Guy McMines from Quinault, was in this time frame, the Pacific Salmon creation, the treaty. But the work before that, through my brother Guy, through Joe Delacruz and our council, I had known Gary long before that, and watched as we built the fisheries program at the Quinault Indian Nation. Dr. Morishima, forestry, fisheries, Cutie and our director. But the connection was with those tribal leaders, with Gary, hand in hand, Guy McMines, Jim Hart, all the tribal leaders from these 20-member tribes of the Northwest Indian Fish Commission. And I'm honored to stand up here to honor Gary. Long overdue. Long overdue. I was in those big rooms. I was in those halls, and I watched the big room with the stage and the work from the technical people as we were writing this treaty. Not me, but those in charge, including Gary. I watched them with those models. They were holding those Texas instruments, and they were beating the model. Whatever they'd say, yeah, it'll take us 24 hours to run the model, right? But all these tech guys, Gary, they're over there with those Tom Cooney. They're beating what analysis this computer is going to give. Those were the days. Those were the days. And I'm privileged to have worked in this past 23 years as policy for Quinault. With all that leader and the mentorship from Gary and those tribal leaders whose shoulders I stand on. So we want to make a presentation, but I'm just the chair of the Northwest Indian Fish Commission, who we work for the 20-member tribes. And we have some staff here also. So I like to just roll it to Ron and others, and then we want to present him with the blanket. The blanket is Raven and the box of knowledge. And when you see it or understand it, or you know who we are and about us, you get the connection. So I just yield the floor to any of our tribal leaders and members here that may want to say something.
Guys, you want to go first?
No, I was gonna tell him Randy's hiding in the back. Randy Rutter.
Randy Hart. Well, I'll start. I'm not sure how many of our colleagues want to make some additional comments. Yeah, all the accolades that all have said with regard to Gary and his significance to this forum and the forums outside of it. Ed talked about other areas like forestry and anything that deal with the habitat and the environment, to be good stewards. And I don't know if it was Guy or if it was Joe or from the Quinault Nation that pulled Gary into the Quinault world, and then the rest of us into our world. But as been noted, we are all benefiting from his grace, from his knowledge, from his wisdom, from his insight, and all that he does to help us do a better job of being better stewards. So I've never been a fish manager, but I come from a family and come from a tribe that cares about salmon, and got myself in the middle of this arena. And it's interesting, my whole family was fisher people, but I wasn't, and I ended up into this management role. So everybody would ask me, what the hell are you doing here? And I go, I don't know, but somebody pushed me into the front line. And so I had to find out what's going on. So I'd make a mistake of asking Gary, so what's this AABM, ISBM? How does this thing work again? Gary would take off, and he lost me at hello. I'm kind of going, oh my God, that was just too much. Dial that down to around a 6th grade level here, and I think I got it, And he would do it. He would do it. And I'm very active in the tribal political world, and he watches what I do in the regional and the national forum, and he's constantly encouraging me to move these agendas. I asked him about, I don't know, a number of months ago, because my tribe was getting into biochar, being good managers with regard to forest products. I get inundated with emails from him about these conferences, about these long documents, and I had to pull them up. They're 100 pages long. He expects me to read that stuff. I'm kind of going, again, Gary, dial it down. I just want to know how to get in it and how to make some money here. But you know, so Gary is just one of those guys that just is an amazing personality, amazing gifts, amazing talents, and it's fun to be around. You know, I mean, he's serious about what he does. He's serious about his charge and his role in this forum, but he's fun to be around. He can dial it down and just have fun and joke away, you know, at things that we're doing. And so, you know, while we're working hard and while we're benefiting from his gifts and his talents and his amazing spirit, it helps us do our job. And so I just have deep appreciation for him. I agree with the point that, you know, Larry's smiling. He kind of goes, it should have been the Gary Morishima Award, you know. So he just, because he just has that kind of the same kind of talent and spirit that Larry had. So I think he's without a doubt, this is a great honor for him. And we're delighted to be able to be here when we can say thank you to Gary. He's not done yet. We're still going to squeeze some more out of that. He's got some tread still, so we'll get more out of him before we're done. But joking aside, you guys, it's a real blessing to be around him, to be working with him for a cause. Salmon, the habitat, nature is in his spirit, and we're all benefiting from it. So, Gary, I raise my hand to you. You're a special guy. It's an honor that you're my friend. Thank you.
Well, I have to follow Ron Allen. I was surprised he yielded the mic. My name is Phil Ogden. My settler name is Russ Hepfer. I'm the vice chairman at the Laurel Waclalam tribe. And Gary, our salmon, say thank you. You speak salmon. And I remember I met you on the ferry one time, got to talking to you, and you spoke salmon to me. I didn't even know you was a doctor, for crying out loud. So we say thank you. I'm a fisherman. I depend on fish that go by my front yard, and Gary's a big part of that. We got to make sure that fish get to where they need to go to spawn. Gary's a big part of that. So we really appreciate that. Elwha fish are coming back thanks to a lot of your hard work. We got all 5 species, including sockeye, going up into our river. My tribe is located in Port Angeles, Washington, directly south of Victoria. And we just wanted to say thank you and have the opportunity to do it in this forum. But I always end by saying we're not damned Indians anymore. We got our damn salmon back and we're damn proud of it. So thank you, Gary.
Hello, I'm Joseph Peters. I'm with the Squaxin tribe. I'm a fisherman. I'm a tribal member. And I just want to share a story with Gary. First of all, I've been around in this process for about 20 years. I've been on the Southern panel for about 10. But I went to my father, Mike Peters, who was once on the Southern panel himself, and I asked him some advice. And he says, the one thing you need to do is you listen to every word that Gary Morishima says. And I have from that day on. So I just wanted to thank you. And on behalf of the Squaxin tribe, I want to thank you as well. So thank you.
Good evening. My name is G.I. James. I'm a current member of the Southern panel. I no longer represent the Lummi Nation. I'm a Lummi Nation tribal member. Been around this process since the beginning, before the beginning in the negotiations. Knew Gary before those negotiations. Our tribal elders and my mentors, and I include Gary as one of those mentors, respected Gary to the utmost. They trusted everything Gary said and believed in science But more than science, they believed in Gary's ability to understand our needs, interpret the science into our needs. Science isn't the paramount number or amount of knowledge. It's based on what the needs are. And Gary knows that. He's been able to work with all of us. There's not a single tribe that doesn't trust Gary and his views. He shared a lot of them with us, and not only in fisheries. He helped us out in self-governance, helped writing some of our papers when we were back in DC, with his abilities to interpret and ask, why do you want to do that? He had to know why you wanted to do something. And then he would also say, why do you want to do that? So I've always appreciated his willingness to share his knowledge, and not like it was the answer. It was a answer. And as our elders taught me, is you hired the best technical people. You've hired the best attorneys, but they sit back there. And if they have something smart to say, they come whisper it in your ear. And if you think it's smart, you say it. It's your treaty right, not theirs. Gary understood that very well, and he advised from that point of view to his Quinault policy people, and always appreciated that very much. He never demanded that you act in the way he advised. He advised from his point of view and his rationale and gave it to you straight. Much like our Larry Rutter and how he did things. And I want to say, yeah, I agree with Ron Allen. You never heard that. But Gary was one of Larry's mentors. And it's odd that Gary's receiving this award, but I know Larry would be proud. I was the third U.S. tribal commissioner to the Pacific Salmon Commission, was the U.S. section chair, and Larry was my shadow. And he wouldn't also be afraid to tell you, no, don't say that. Even though from a policy perspective, that's what I believed and what I felt. And from where I come from, that's what I was taught. You bring those things forward. Now, what other people do with them is their issue, but you don't remain silent when you have something to say. Larry never did that. Gary never did that. He didn't do it out in front of everybody, but he would advise you, and appreciate that very much, Gary. Heishka, and congratulations.
Go ahead and give your name and pick it off.
Hello, I'm Cleve Jackson. I'm Quinault Indian Nation's newly appointed fisheries policy spokesperson. I've known Gary here for a short 2 months, but he's been a great amount of help. He's worked with my grandpa, my great grandpa. I'm the 6th generation coming from my family, so I appreciate the work that you've done. You know, I've been able to fish them fish and all the things that resources that we have there in Quinault. And I just have a song we'd like to sing you while giving you this blanket. Si Okwil.
You'd like it first, or you can sing?
You can do it while I'm singing, I guess.
Okay.
Oh, yo, ale, ala, yo, hey, ale, ala, yo, hey, hey, ah, hey, hey, ah, hey, hey. Oh, 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 hey, 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 oh, 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 man.
Yeah, just in closing, there's probably a paper in there with a description, but the blanket is Raven and the box of knowledge, which we think couldn't have been more fitting for to honor Gary tonight, and we just appreciate all that he's done for us, for all of us in this process, and look forward to continuing our journey as we work for the salmon and for our people. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ed, and thanks to the members of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission tribes. I think next we have our colleagues from the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission who would like to say a few things. Wilbur?
I think I'm gonna do a little bit different because you know, if it wasn't for guys like Gary inspiring our young people to become biologists and take over opposing, because at that time the state of Washington and Oregon were the only ones that had the numbers, and we had to wait until they caught all the fish, and then we had to conserve, and we got very little. So I'm grateful for that, for him leading that way for our people. I have helped two of my tribal members to become biologists. I helped with their college. So there's a lot of things there, and that's why we appreciate him, the one that inspired the numbers, so that we could set our own and argue back with the state of Washington and Oregon. And I know a lot of you don't understand that because they were trying to take away our fishing rights. So in 1977, that's when we formed I wasn't part of it, though. I was opposed to it. The Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. But after I got there, I understood the importance of voicing and standing up for these fish, because they're part of us. That's a lot of things there, and that people don't understand. Without the salmon, we won't be people anymore. So I have the rest of the four ones that are the commissioners, Shannon Wheeler, Bud Herrera, Ron Suppa, and me. And the others are our staff members, and very much appreciate them, because I've learned a lot, because I was just in opposition to both states. Whatever they did, I was against it. And I got labeled crook, criminal, thief, stealing their resources. But we learned to get along and finally figure out we got to take care of them, because that's the instructions all of our tribes, member tribes of that, were given. Take care of the water, take care of the land, the air, and the animals, and especially the salmon. I always say they're the first water rights, the original water rights holder, but they don't get recognized as that. So I'd like my fellow commissioners to say something if they want to, but we heard he was getting a blanket, and we said, gosh, he'll have to pack out too. So we got him a sweater. Because yeah, a Pendleton sweater for him to enjoy and remember this day, and thankful to him for what he's done for all tribal nations. And if you don't understand what I just said, ask Phil Anderson, he knows.
Hello, my name is Bud Herrera from the Confederate Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation. Thank you, Gary. One thing we've learned is that what we say is that we're salmon people. We're from the Sahaptin people of the Columbia River. We speak for the ones that can't speak no more for themselves. So on behalf of Gary, you've done 40 years. And one thing I've learned from staff, from Ron, Phil at the PFMC is that, you know, the smartest man in the room is sitting before us. So with that, thank you very much on behalf of our tribe. Thank you, Gary.
Good evening. My name is Shannon Wheeler. I'm the vice chairman for the Nez Perce tribe. Honestly, I haven't even had the opportunity to meet Gary, but I have seen the work. And, you know, we have tribal staff and tribal members that are part of the Pacific Salmon Commission. And one thing that has been kind of resounding through this process is our position and our obligation to the salmon. And it goes back what we call Tamalwit, the unwritten laws, the laws that were written upon this land before human beings, the Titawit, who we are as people. Before we came, the salmon were here, and the rest of the animals. And salmon in our story give himself to the human beings first, so that we could survive. And obviously, you know, that stands true because salmon was already giving himself to the landscape and to the rest the rest of the world. And that's what we come to know the Pacific Northwest for all of its beauty and all of its assets, our resources, or we like to call them life sources that are here. And that's really based off of what salmon and the distribution of the nutrients that they provide. But it's nice to be able to grab all that information of what they actually are and be able to put those forward, and so people have a greater understanding of what we as tribes have understood for thousands of years, and that simple obligation to the salmon and that ancient covenant that we have with the salmon. So Gary, on behalf of the Nez Perce tribe, who is part of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, thank you for all your work.
Those who might not know me, my name is McCoy Oatman. I serve as a tribal commissioner, and just realizing I've been part of this process since 2011, 2012. So over 10 years. And but I met Gary before that. I was on one of the youngest members on our tribal council, was elected. And then one of the first meetings I went to, my cousin Howard Teasley works for our forestry program. And so he's like, oh yeah, we're going down to the Mescalero Apache to Intertribal Timber Council meeting. You know, do you want to go? Because hard time getting policy person to go. So I was like, oh yeah, I'll go. And so we, you know, fly into Albuquerque. And he's, oh yeah, by the way, we got to pick up this guy. He's going to ride out with us. You know, it's like a 3-hour ride, you know. And so it was like late at night, and we met Gary at the airport, and there he was with us, you know, 2 Nez Perces cruising out to Mescalero Apache. And then we got to tour all their projects and stuff. And so then I end up in a truck with Butch Blazer and Gary, and didn't know, you know, what company I was actually in, you know, and the work that they did. And I just remember before we got there, you know, how he was telling me about Gary. You know, he's like, yeah, he's a really, you know, really smart guy. And he's like, oh yeah, and I heard he doesn't sleep much, he just works, you know. And now I believe it. But then I became part of this process, and really fortunate that my tribal council allowed me to stay on as a salmon commissioner, because I'm not on our tribal council anymore. I lost re-election in 2020, you know, which is nature of the game. But you know, they had confidence in me to stay here, and I think part of that is having really good mentors. When I first came in and being a young man, me and my brother Joe. I was just telling somebody today, you know, we just come from a little town of 1,000 people, you know, but our family comes from a long line of fishermen down on the Salmon River. And so we were always charged with protecting that resource. We're both 7th-generation descendants of old Chief Looking Glass, who was a treaty signer in 1855. And so we keep that 7th-generation mentality. And so me and Joe are setting that, you know, groundwork for our kids, you know, and for the next 7 generations. And that's how we view these things. And I know that Gary understands that as well. And all the foundational things that we're doing now, you know, are going to impact those future generations. And when I first came involved, one of the first calls I got was from Larry Rutter, and he kind of wanted to, you know, school me on what the commission's about. And so, you know, I just didn't come in at totally green, and he realized that, you know, I was a young commissioner and that I needed that guidance. And Gary was always there when I first came in this process too, to help me learn the ropes and understand some things. Because when I first became part of the commission, they just said, I was in this building, and they said, oh yeah, you're part of the SIG now. You got to go down to the wine cellar and and a SIG, you know, I had the cigarettes. I don't even know what SIG meant, you know. I had no idea, but they just, you know, threw me into it and said, yeah, go down there. And I didn't know what AABM, like Ron was saying, I didn't know any of the acronyms, you know. I was used to the Columbia River, you know, acronyms. I served on USV Oregon, but this is a whole, you know, whole different animal. But I'd like to thank you, Gary, for your work and for what you do for us as tribal people. And, you know, I know our ancestors to see that. And I know that the future generations will also, you know, benefit from your work. And that's the most thing that I'm really grateful for. So, Katsiaya, thank you.
Got to follow my younger brother here. So I didn't really get to know Larry. You know, when I came on the panel, we had a tribal caucus with the Western Washington tribes and the Columbia tribes up in Seattle. And I was told about Larry. And when we came in the big room and stuff, kind of much like this, we had the tables and sat down, and then Larry sat down right to my right, and pretty intimidating, you know, kind of young guy, don't know a whole lot about stuff, you know, and Larry was there to meet with the tribes, and so, you know, being sort of intimidated, you know, partway through, I asked him a question, and really super basic question, but you know, his response, you know, it really left me with the impression, you know, just how smart, you know, how knowledgeable that Larry was, and while it was a brief encounter, you know, those type of moments, you know, leave that kind of an impression. And so on the panel, you know, with Gary being on the co-technical committee, you know, his reputation precedes him, you know, and so we learned pretty early on just how instrumental and kind of how critical Gary is to this whole process. And over the years, I've been able to, you know, work with him in the panel setting. You know, his knowledge, his expertise, his care, you know, for the resource in this process has always, you know, shown through. And here of late, you know, the work that he's helped with the, you know, getting stuff going on environmental variability, you know, and climate change, and you know, how scary, you know, this future looks for all of us, you know, within this PSC family, not just the tribes. You know, that's looking to the future, you know, and that's having vision to say, hey, we need to do something about that, you know, before it's too late. And you know, when I think about, you know, our fishing on the Columbia and the Snake River, you know, and all the stuff that Gary's done over the years that, you know, helps us out, you know, that's remarkable in so many ways. And so I appreciate the time I've been able to work with you, and glad that time's not over, and very much, you know, trust and appreciate your leadership that you provide to us. So thank you.
Declare it. Wadishas, Achash, Achai. One of my uncles in our sovereignty state declaration said the words, Chicha, the English, we Sidwit, Nabiwa, Tabalwit, Tichum, the Tittite. Naksh, Wada, Daksh, Tabalwit, Daksh, Sidwit, Daksh, Tabda. And I grew up traditional. I've been a hunter and a fisher all my life, and the best way that I know how to honor you, Harry, is probably with a song that I was given by my elders. It's the warrior song, and you truly are a warrior. And humankind has a bad habit. We always tend to lose all the good ones too soon. I hope you don't quit on us, and that you keep reaching out and giving us a hand and helping us. But my mother gave me the name Achai, which means magpie in my language, and she gave it to me was because she said I talk too darn much. But anyways, that being there, then if the boys can help me out with the song, I appreciate it. Shipka.
Yep, Gary, we want to present you. with this. It's a. Yeah. You're very much appreciated. When we heard about I'm getting the award and Ed Johnston said, we're getting him a blanket. Oh, geez. We don't want to do that again. So I think he'll wear this more than the blanket. Okay. You can put the dogs if you want.
Thank you, Wilbur, and thank you to our colleagues from up and down the Columbia River. GI.
Well, when I got down here this week, I found out that Gary was going to be the recipient of this award, and I'm going, oh, cripe. Well, we didn't have time to prepare, and me personally didn't. I felt I needed to do something. I scrambled and thought, and then I go, oh, I was over at Portland Hamburger place there, and geez, I admire artwork. I have trouble doing stick people, so I admire artwork. And this young lady was there doing artwork on bags, and I said, "Would you do one for?" My friend. And she said, sure, what do you want on it? And so I said, yeah, we need a salmon, and thank you, Gary, on it. And then I was walking back and I'm going, oh, you know, our teachings is you can't give somebody an empty bag or container to somebody for a gift. That's wrong. So I'm going, ooh, what do I put in it? So there's something in there. And it's just a small gift, and I just want to say I appreciate you very much, Gary.
Thanks, GI. Is there anyone else who would like to say a few words before we let Gary come up and say a few words if he wants to? Okay. Gary, I'll end by saying that I hope you know how much you mean to the entire organization, and that the songs and the prayers and the words that we've heard tonight are just a small fraction of how we really value your participation here. You and I have only overlapped for about a decade or so in this process, but in that decade, in addition to my inbox filling up with articles from you, I know I've walked away wiser, and I'll appreciate that. And I know that that's going to continue in the years ahead. So Gary, would you like to come up and respond, and then we'll kind of call it an evening. Thanks.
Well, I am really overwhelmed. Don't know really quite what to say, but I jotted down a few notes anyway. So if you'll be patient with me, I want to give you a little bit about my background. I haven't always been a fish guy. When I was a young man just graduating from high school, I had dreams of becoming an architect and build these wonderful buildings that would last a long time. But one of the things that I had the opportunity to do was to work as a draftsman in the office of a well-known architect in downtown Seattle. And in those days, you didn't have all these automated ways of developing blueprints. You sat there on a little drafting desk with a little pen and tried to draw out the pictures and put in the letters and the dimensions and all these kinds of things. But it wasn't long before I really was disturbed. And what disturbed me was that the architect was cutting corners. And I was really concerned because what the consequences of that would be huge for somebody down the line, or could be huge. We're seeing some of this right now in the Middle East, right? So that was something that I said, no, I can't do this. I can't do this for the rest of my life. So then I decided I'm going to change what I wanted to study in school. So I changed to mathematics. And mathematics, you know, was sort of one of those times where instead of having to deal a lot with people, you deal with numbers, and numbers aren't supposed to lie, right? It's just the people that use them that end up here. But, you know, during the Vietnam War as well, I was sort of a grunt. And the CO came to me and said, we're going to make you an officer. So he offered to take me through the process and get a direct commission. So I said, oh, well, maybe better than being a grunt. So I said, well, go ahead. But during that time, what happened was the Malay incident. Those of you might remember that. You had Lieutenant Kelly, who went in and slaughtered a bunch of villagers in Vietnam simply because he was ordered to do so. So I said, thanks, but no thanks. That's something I just couldn't do. That's a line I could not cross. The CO wasn't pleased. He already assigned me. But I said, that's the way it is. I pay the consequences. I've made my decision. And I thought I was in common ground. I also worked as a systems analyst for the Boeing company for a number of years. And at the Boeing company, I learned a lot about complex systems and how you manufacture airplanes and all the bits and pieces and the parts that had to be ordered in certain sequences and be there at particular times. But what I came away with most from that experience was really understanding the sort of corporate behavior and corporate mentality. So I understand what was really motivating the supervisors in this. I knew that there was a hierarchy. Those of you who worked in Boeing knew that you had certain color badges, right? So you had color badges if you were sort of a grunt or a supervisor or, you know, whatever. So those were sort of status symbols. And they were used to really gain authoritarian control everything, control your decisions, control this and that. But it wasn't long when I was experiencing that I became aware of a book by Rachel Carlson, The Silent Spring. And what that did was really open my eyes, because here was a book that was written by a young lady, a young scientist at that time, who talked about what was happening to the environment, that the chemicals that were being put in the environment were poisoning the birds. And when I started looking into it, I found from my standpoint that many of the things that were happening were because people had a very narrow point of view. Their viewpoint was siloed, and they didn't understand the consequences of their actions, or maybe they didn't care even if they did understand. But those consequences were pretty serious to me. And it was something that said, I've got to do something about this. So I decided I was going to go to graduate school. And in graduate school, I decided I was going to pursue an individual PhD program on really in quantitative science and environmental management, which is probably a little bit, you know, sort of leading the field at that time. But it was an interdisciplinary field. And that's where I first learned and became acquainted with Guy McMines, Joe Dela Cruz, and a couple other tribal leaders came to the University of Washington, and they said, we need your help. And they explained the situation that they were facing in terms of the resources, the fish, the forests, and asked for help. And I raised my hand and went down and helped them develop a natural resource program. And part of this was I was asked to be a forest manager for Quinault. And I don't know how many of you know the history of Quinault, but Quinault, the reservation, had been managed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The forest resources had been managed by them since the early 1900s. And they were liquidating the resource. There was no replanting. They were leaving mountains of slash on the ground. The streams were covered with slash, totally impassable. We had miles of streams. We had over 200 tons of logging slash per acre left behind. So this was something I couldn't stand for. So I raised my hand, raised my voice, and said, what you're doing is wrong. You have to change your ways. And they were reluctant to do so. We had actually filed suit. Quinault had filed suit against the United States for mismanagement of the forest resources. But at that time as well, I happened to be working on something called the Indian Self-Determination Education Assistance Act, which was passed in 1975. And that provided an opportunity for tribes to assume greater responsibility and control for their natural resources. And I was asked to be the forest manager. So I didn't like what the Bureau of Indian Affairs was doing. So I built the Quinault Forestry Program to meet the needs of the community. And I also started a national organization that would affect change nationwide for all tribes that were facing similar circumstances with the domination of the federal government in terms of how they were managing the forest resources and the need to have the tribal voice heard. Well, one of the things that I learned from Joe Dela Cruz, who was the longtime president of the Quinault Indian Nation, was to lead and people will follow. So my goal was really to help tribal leadership, tribal decision makers contend with the challenges that they were facing and to raise their voice, to make their voice heard in a way that would be meaningful and effective. But he taught me to take the initiative. He taught me to accept responsibility and be prepared to accept the consequences. So those are lessons that I think could serve us all well. But one of the things that he taught me about was trust walks. And I don't know how many of you know what a trust walk is, but that's a situation where you blindfold somebody and you take his hand and you lead him along a path. So he is just holding on to your hands and you're leading him on a dangerous path. Lots of potential damages, but he's putting his trust in you that you're going to keep him safe. So throughout my career, you know, I've worked on fish and forests and climate change and those sorts of things, but my mission has always been the same. Try to give a voice to those who haven't been heard, whether it's fish or trees or the air or the water or tribes. The generations yet unborn that don't have a voice and yet are going to bear the consequences of the decisions that are made today. So I have a particular affinity with working with tribal peoples because I think that their worldview is really the best hope for our future of the environment, taking care of the salmon, taking care of the trees and the water and those sorts of things. Their point of view is holistic, that all things are connected. the people, the water, the land, the fish, the air. We can't look at things in isolation, that we have to understand the connections. We have to understand how everything and everybody is interrelated. That what I do to you is going to have some consequences. What you do to me is going to have consequences. And it's important that we understand what they are. Now, I've had the privilege and the pleasure of working with lots of scientists over the course of my career, many of whom are no longer with us, many of whom were instrumental in the formation of the Pacific Salmon Commission and many of the processes. Lee Alverson, Don Bevan was on the Chinook Technical Committee. Jerry Pollock, who was actually the chairman of my committee at the University of Washington. Bob Heyman. Some of you may have known Bob. He was really quite a character. He had his own personality and his own way of going about business. Nick Glamsakis, Jim Packer, Michael Chamberlain. There's so many that I can't, I'm a fear that I'm going to leave some out. John H. Clark just left us a few months ago. So these are people that I had the opportunity to work with, learn from, and perhaps give them a little bit of, feedback. But one of the things that I became aware of in this process pretty early on is that I was a numbers guy, and I thought I could crunch the numbers in any way I needed, and I would come up with the answer. And the answer would be obvious to everybody, and the decisions would be obvious. But that wasn't the case. That there were other factors that were being brought to bear. And one of the things that I learned pretty early on was that, I might tell them what the numbers say, but they're going to decide things in their own way. And we had some really colorful personalities on the PSC at that time. Don Collinsworth from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and Guy McMines, Big Butch McMines. When they would reach an impasse, it wasn't going to turn to numbers. You know what they did? They took pennies out of their pockets and threw them against the wall. And the pennies that got closest to the wall would prevail. So that sort of opened my eyes. But it was really people from many of the tribal communities here that taught me what fish mean. The fish aren't just numbers. They're not things to be caught, sold, or eaten. They're relatives. They're relatives that share the same space that we do. They're relatives that have to be cared for. They're relatives that if they give us something, we have to give them things back in return. So Tim Wapato, Guy McMines, Joe Delacruz, Billy Frank, Lorraine Loomis, Terry Williams, who left us just a few months ago as well. They taught me that salmon are not resources to be caught, sold, and eaten, but they're relatives. And that we have to treat them with respect, that if we take from them, we have to give in return. And these are lessons, I think, that are going to serve us well. As many of our tribal leaders had mentioned, the fish, the salmon, have conscious spirits that cause them to voluntarily give of their bodies during times of need. Their relatives who made sacrifices for the land and for the people. But I enjoyed a very special relationship with Larry Rutter. Larry was kind of a unique personality. I met him during the early 1980s when I was a commissioner on the Salmon and Steelhead Advisory Commission. And Larry, he was sort of new and green, if you will, working with the Point No Point Treaty Council, but he was anxious to learn. And he wasn't shy about pushing back. And one of the things I really miss most about Larry was really the game of mental racquetball that we would often play. So with Larry, we would bounce ideas back and forth. But like racquetball, it wasn't as if we were playing against a square wall with flat walls. If you hit a ball against the wall, it would be met with hills and crevices and valleys, and you never know where it was going to come back. But that kind of exchange was healthy. It opened eyes. It opened new ways of thinking about problems, new ways of trying to solve impasses. So Larry was a real special guy. So I worked with Larry when he was at the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, when he was with helping try to organize an entity called For the Sake of the Salmon that was established in Oregon, and the Pacific Salmon Commission process. So, but working with tribes and First Nations, mostly, I've learned a lot about interrelationships, about people and resources, and principles of respect, reciprocity, responsibility that really lay at the foundation of the way that they view the world and the relationship with the resources in which they contend with. So they left me with a lesson. Everything is connected, that we are part of the land and the water, not apart from it. A reminder of the imperative to create an ethical space within which we can begin to approach the challenges that we face, and to face those challenges with humility and hubris, not with arrogance and domination. You know, as I look back over the course of my career, there are many parallels with salmon. I realized that as I got out of college, with all this background in mathematics and modeling and those sorts of things, I was like a smolt, sort of eager and a little bit naive to confront the kinds of challenges that I would be facing. How are natural resources, fish, how are decisions that were being made in the real world affecting these resources and affecting the relatives? So, as I mentioned, I started my career as a numbers guy, figured I could crunch the numbers in lots of different ways and really open some eyes to find the answer. But over the years, it's the tribal leadership that really helped me to grow and learn to see numbers in different terms. So the numbers weren't fish, how many fish you could catch, how many pounds you could sell. They made those fish meaningful and real because they helped me to understand the need to translate and transform these statistics and these abstract ideas into terms that were relevant and meaningful to the way of life. So it's not just about pieces, not about pounds or things to be eaten or sold, but what fish and fishing mean to the communities and the people that really depend upon them. So I've tried to be a bridge of sorts between science, tribes, First Nations, and decision makers, doing my best to investigate, integrate, synthesize, and explore to help make numbers, data, and ideas and information into tools, relationships, and with responsibilities and accountability. So salmon have been a part of my life almost as long as I can remember. As a young child, my parents would take me to a stream in the neighborhood where I could see spawning salmon. The sound, the smell, and the spectacle of spawning salmon was something that really never left me. Another thing that I learned as a young child was when my father or uncle would give me an occasional piece of jerky, salmon jerky. So biting into that jerky and the burst of flavor is something I remember. Now, as I grew and started testing my wings a little bit, I was an avid angler. So I learned how to catch salmon mooching and then later on a fly. As a scientist, I was really struck by and intrigued by the diversity, the complexity, and adaptability of this remarkable species that we have been gifted with and entrusted to our care. But during my career, I've seen a lot of changes happen. A culture that had been based upon abundance and sharing has now been replaced by a culture based upon scarcity and competition. We've forgotten what it means to be part of the whole. We've forgotten what it means to be part of something that not only receives, but something that has the obligation and the responsibility to return. As a human being, I was captured by the tenacity and determination of these fish to overcome tremendous challenges from many different quarters as they struggle to complete their life cycle and their journey to come home to perpetuate their kind. Now today, as an elder, I've reached a stage in my life that I've become increasingly aware of the mortality and the fragility of life and how precious it is. When I return to the places that I used to visit as a child, I don't see very many salmon anymore. The noise, the sound, the smell are pretty much gone. And some of the rivers have also gone. Those of you who have worked with me know that I don't sleep very much. Lately, I've been sleeping a lot less. And that's because I have been experiencing some dreams, some troubling visions. And those visions, simply put, is that after salmon have struggled for so long to try to return to the places of their birth to spawn, there's no water. That all they find is mist, the mist of fog. And those are really troubling impacts to me, things that keep me awake, things that I worry about. The challenges that need to be undertaken to be able to save the salmon in the future are huge. They're enormous, they're complex, they're tough challenges, tough decisions that need to be made. But what I go back to is the world of the tribal elders. All things are connected. That taking must be balanced by giving. And if we have failed to accept the responsibility and accountability for salmon, we're no longer going to enjoy the gifts that they provide. The food, the livelihoods, the enjoyment, the inspiration that they have provided for so many for so long. Now, this commission deals a lot with fisheries and how do we divvy up the few fish that are there, and those fish are dwindling. But we can't afford to labor under the illusion that we'll be able to manage our salmon fisheries and restore the productivity and abundance of salmon. That's an illusion, and the sooner we recognize it, the better off we're going to be. It's going to take all hands working in concert, and the challenges are great and they're very large. So, what I'd like to leave you with is a little thought. that in many ways, the salmon are the trust walk. They're depending upon us to lead them to safety. They're depending upon us to provide them with a future. It's time for us to pick up our challenge and move forward. Thank you for listening to an old man ramble. I really greatly appreciate the sentiments and thoughts that have been shared today. It's been really a remarkable experience. So thank you all.
Thank you, Gary. It's hard to know what to say after hearing all of that. I guess I just repeat what I said before. I hope you know how much the Salmon Commission family cares about you and what we think of the words that you said. And I think what struck me is that all the respect that people showed for you in the lead up to your remarks indicates that the things you've told us tonight will be taken seriously and under under the light of truth that I think you offered it in. With that, I'll say good night to everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening on behalf of Larry's family and the commission's family. Wish you all the best, and we'll see you tomorrow and Friday as we wrap up the week. Thanks.